Hello everybody and welcome to the 7Artisans Photoelectric 50mm f1.1 full frame ultra fast lens review. The 7Artisans 50mm f1.1 is made by, 7Artisans I believe is the brand. The lens also says DJ Optical. I believe DJ Optical actually makes it. It was first available on Amazon on the 8th of September 2017 and is still listed as available new on 7Artisans' website. The typical lens used for this lens will be portraits. The fast aperture on this lens is intended as a portrait aperture. The APS-C crop factor, for those of you who shoot APS-C, makes this a good option for APS-C portrait shooters, as the light loss that this lens exhibits can primarily be bypassed on APS-C and also even more so on Micro Four Thirds. The ultra-fast aperture also gives you a depth of field which looks pretty darn close to a good and classic medium format portrait lens on the smaller sensors of full frame and smaller. To get right to the crux of this up front, nothing I can really say here sums up this lens better than the closing thoughts on the 35mm review, which I highly recommend you read and click on the link to it in this video's description after, of course, you finish this video. In short, if this lens had been made in the 60s to 80s in limited quantity by a Japanese badge of any tier, this would be one of the most sought-out rangefinder lenses ever made. That it's produced in quantity today and in China leads to a lot of people writing it off easily. And that latter point is a shame because, used right and well, this lens can create captivating images in select settings. Reciting, basically, the 7Artisans website, the focal length and AOV are 50mm and 46 degrees diagonal on full frame, 75mm equivalent and 27 degrees diagonal on APS-C. The aperture range is stepless from 1.1 to 16. The element and group count are 7 elements and 6 groups. This is a sonar type design. One quick note is that there's a Leica Rumors website in the sources. I included that because that indicates this is an Ultron design. It is not. When we look at the design for this lens in a couple of sections, it's pretty clear it's a sonar, and also 7Artisans' webpage confirms that it's a sonar. The filter size is 55mm. Closest focus out of the box is 0.7 meters, which is 30.67%, the average wingspan of a large bald eagle for those of us in the United States. It's manual focus only, available only in Leica M. I used it exclusively on Sony E via both a standard adapter as well as a macro focusing adapter, and we'll cover those a little bit later in this video. The dimensions are 60mm by 49, and it weighs in at quite the hefty, probably could stand to go on a little bit of a diet, 400 grams. My first and best tip for you is that this lens works the best from wide open to f5.6 at close focus. Stop down past f5.6 and focused much beyond 15 feet, it's pretty generic. When you fill the frame with your portrait subject and hang out in the large aperture space, you'll be happy. To that end, 7Artisans, if you're watching, with lenses like this, there's really no reason to have it stop down past f5.6 or at most f8. I'd rather have a lens like this that stops down less but has a circular aperture across the entire range, as that's really where this lens likes to be used, and having that perfectly circular aperture, or near perfectly, across a smaller range will result in better images from a lens like this. My next tip is that if you shoot mirrorless, buy a macro focusing adapter instead of a standard adapter from Leica M to your preferred mount. The close focus on this lens out of the box it's a bit far, but with a macro focusing adapter, at least on Sony E, I could get the focus down to a highly usable 34 centimeters, which is a closer focus than the majority of kit fast 50 lenses. And 7Artisans, I know there is a lot of prestige in making lenses in Leica M mount, but lenses like this one in the mirrorless mounts would have a market. I, for one, would be happy to buy something like this in mirrorless if it included a longer focus throw than the M mount equivalent for subjects to avoid with this lens. 50mm, they're like a general walk-around lens. They're the kit, right? Well, I don't really recommend this lens as a general use kit walk-around type lens. It's not the 50mm that you are likely used to as having the first or a standard lens on your SLR. This lens creates character-rich images, not technically perfect photographs. So using it for general use will likely, unless your general use images embrace the character in this lens, set it up to underperform. Subjects like astrophotography and architecture, as we've covered in a previous 50mm f1.1 lens review video, are not great subjects because, again, character lens, not technical lens. This is a pretty classic sonar lens design, so expect it to perform like a sonar and you will be happy. It performs, honestly, like an exceptional sonar, and that's because that's what it is. Like the best sonar lenses, this lens works best in the portrait space. Breathing is considerable, especially and even more so at the image peripheries, when you focus from the closest to the infinity focus points. I would suggest that APS-C and Micro Four Thirds video shooters will have fewer issues with breathing with this lens, but it would also come at the cost of a lot of the lens's image character. The aperture is stepless and has 12 blades. The front element is non-rotating, but it does move in and out about a ½ centimeter. Focus throw is 90 degrees. The focusing ring is stationary and reasonably wide. The rubber grip that mine came with also makes this lens very, very easy to focus. Focus damping was exceptional and smooth, and even across the focus range. Focus ring play, well, honestly, there was none that I perceived, either in use for stills or in video, and that also applies to the aperture ring, by the way. Sharpness is good to very good in the center of the image when stopped down. If you shoot APS-C, you'll be quite happy with overall image sharpness. Stopping down through the best apertures also reduces the chaos in the out-of-focus areas. This really peaks about f4 to f5.6 in terms of boosting image sharpness and marrying that with less out-of-focus area chaos. We'll talk a little bit more about that and how to prevent it in just a few moments as well. Wide open and focused close, this lens is quite soft with a depth of field that could be measured in Planck units. The softness remains until around f2, and you know what? That's okay because that's part of what this lens is supposed to do. So don't go into this lens's use expecting technical perfection, especially wide open, as it relates to sharpness, and you'll be very happy with the sharpness it delivers. Build quality is stunning in terms of mechanical features such as the focus ring and damping, aperture ring and damping, aperture blade and the out-of-focus area characteristics they provide, and the overall metal component machining quality. This is a very well-made lens. Contrast is pretty darn good out of the box, and the lens tends to render warmly, Both of those things, by the way, make it very good for portrait use and reinforce that this lens is really designed for that. As we mentioned, out-of-focus area characteristics are often chaotic, and I found that this could be tamed with specific scene setups and settings. Focusing with the macro adapter that I used to focus points closer than the design minimum did help in taming the out-of-focus area chaos. Within the designed focus range, the best way to tame the chaos in the out-of-focus areas is to shoot against a flat background. And I don't mean a flat color, but horizontally flat, parallel with your sensor plane. With this lens, the most chaotic out-of-focus examples in this video stem from images where there is significant horizontal depth behind the subject and the aperture is wide open or very nearly wide open. I suspect that the chaos in the out-of-focus areas in those samples is due to the difference in circle of confusion sizes for points at different distances from the lens. Distortion is pretty well limited to barrel distortion, and by the standards of modern 50mm lenses, it is significant. However, in practical application and as a character portrait lens, the barrel distortion won't affect your images in a negative manner at all. Using this lens for subjects like architecture, which it should never be used for anyway, will result in the barrel distortion affecting your images. Light loss is significant across the apertures and never fully disappears. It is also significant enough that in real-world use, it is likely to be noticeable. These samples show both white screen light loss, real-world examples, and a video scrolling through the apertures to show how light loss looks in both tested and real settings. Any of the optical design flaws in this lens, by and large, can be considered character elements. The biggest flaw I'll point out is the purple ghosting that happens on some occasions with this lens, and it's really related to how light that's outside of the frame, especially up and at an angle, is entering and reflecting around inside of the lens. That can definitely be something that adds some flare character to your images. What's most annoying about that, however, is that the incident light in that purple ghosting, when it reaches the sensor, is arriving at a different angle, and that highlights any sensor dirt that isn't apparent in other images or with other uses that don't have that purple flare. If you want to use that ghosting as an image element, be very, very sure to clean your sensor well first. I always did. I was still cloning out dust when it happened. Balance with cameras is a challenge. This lens is very heavy and very front heavy. It did not feel well balanced with any of the cameras I used it on, including the heavy Sony a7S II. And that's just going to be part and parcel to using this lens. But if you're using a very small and lightweight camera, it's going to be even more noticeable. I would wager that a lot of this lens's detractors have not tried it. I was skeptical, highly skeptical, of this lens before I tried it. I go into every lens, camera, film, or whatever review with an idea of what I expect I will think about the gear. Sometimes it's a general idea, something like, I'll be interested to see if this thing performs like I expect. And sometimes it's a strong feeling like, I know I will adore or hate or be indifferent to this thing. I am, by the way, correct only about 50% of the time. So I started this review's image taking expecting to hate this lens on a visceral level. Now, I do not. I like it. I like it quite a bit. This lens has a good optical design and good optical performance that delivers well on the thing that it does. Portraits taken close to your subject. The image character has to be embraced, and admittedly I had to learn to like it and learn to use it. And doing that, the actual physical experience of this lens backs up the enjoyment of it if you like the images it delivers. And you really do need to embrace this lens's look, the images from it, because there's no way around them, and frankly, being primarily a purpose-built lens for portrait photographers who want to get close to their subjects, there's not a whole lot else you can or should do with it. One last point on this lens. Treat it like a luxury item. It's large, heavy, well made, well designed, and it does a small number of things very well. It should be used and enjoyed, and if this lens is interesting to you, I strongly recommend you do just that. At the prices these fetch new and used, they are definitely an affordable entry into ultra-fast portrait lens use. If you buy this lens, as I did, expecting it to be a fast 50 you can carry around and use as a generalist, you will be disappointed. If you change your expectations and buy it to be a specialist, you could be very happy with it.